Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this special Ascending Leaders event. We are so grateful you decided to tune in today. My name is Audra Desfoulian, and I'm the church liaison here at Ascending Leaders. Joining me as moderator in today's discussion is Reverend Dr. Mike Johnson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Johnson. I'm the founder and president of Ascending Leaders. It's a joy to welcome you to this webinar. Audra and I are excited to be hosting this event and leading this discussion. Those of you who've already been engaged with us for some time know that our mission is to equip churches for Christ-centered discipleship. One of the main ways we do that is by providing pastors and church leaders with experienced discipleship coaches who help you discover your church's unique discipleship strengths, set measurable goals for creating discipleship cultures, and guide you in achieving eternal outcomes. We partner both with the Holy Spirit and with you as leaders in the local church, and we help bring people closer to God, equipping them to be His agents in His mission.
That's right, Mike. And today we are so pleased to bring you two of our previous clients, and they're Reverend Jordan McFall and Reverend Marc Donaldson. These two pastors have experienced firsthand what a partnership with Ascending Leaders can do to increase spiritual vitality in the local church. They're going to be talking about using a discipleship assessment with their congregations and to build a discipleship culture and pathways. Both of these pastors went through the discipleship assessment with their congregations, and both used the results of this assessment and the help of Ascending Leaders to make discipleship gains in their congregations. So we're going to be talking about that today and about their real life experiences. So without further ado, please allow us to introduce them to you.
First, we have Reverend Jordan McFall. Jordan is lead pastor of the Goddard Church in Goddard, Kansas, which is a small suburb of Wichita, Kansas. He's been serving there since 2020, and previously was an associate pastor at Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Wichita. Goddard Church is part of the new Global Methodist Church and has a mission to be fully devoted to Jesus by opening arms to those in search of the truth. Goddard Church is a smaller church. Jordan and his church are part of an Ascending Leaders 2-year discipleship collab, about a year into it, along with 2 other churches. Jordan, thank you for being with us today.
And next we have Reverend Marc Donaldson. Marc is the pastor of contemporary worship and discipleship at Marvin Church in Tyler, Texas. He's been serving there since 2020, and previous to that spent 21 years serving Christ Church UMC in the Woodlands just outside of Houston, Texas. Marvin is also part of the newly formed Global Methodist Church and has a mission to call, equip, and send. In early of 2021, Marc had Ascending Leaders bring a discipleship workshop to Marvin Methodist and guide them in taking a discipleship assessment, as he had done at his previous church. And we're going to be hearing about that experience today. Marvin is a larger church. Thank you, Marc, for joining us this afternoon, and we're excited to hear from you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Great. So Mike and I thought we would open up by asking each of us to tell you a little bit about how you came to know Ascending Leaders and what it was that convinced you that Ascending Leaders would be a great partner on the path to discipleship growth. And you can feel free to flatter us as much as you like, but really we want to hear about what brought you to Ascending Leaders from the get-go.
Either one of us?
Anybody can start.
Sure. So several years ago at annual conference in the Woodlands, I ran into my former youth pastor, and he handed me a card. Ascending Leaders was a vendor at that annual conference, and Blair had picked up the card from the booth, but he had experience with Ascending Leaders as well, and just said, "This is the most important decision we've ever made in ministry." And so I followed up on it, and that fall went to a Disciple On conference at HBU at the time, HBU, Houston Baptist University, and really learned all of the stages of faith and the culture and philosophy around discipleship. And that's when we decided to bring Ascending Leaders and Mike Johnson to our church to do a similar retreat and to proctor the Reveal survey and give us some coaching at Christ Church. And when I moved to Marvin, I just followed the same suit.
Awesome. Thank you, Marc. Jordan?
Yeah, for me, it was more of an email from a colleague, Reverend Wendy Muller-Seib, who at the time worked at Southwestern College and for the Discipleship Institute. She's now at Friends University, and she reached out and said, "Hey, here's a great opportunity for you to look at and consider." And it just kind of fell at the right time. I was about a year and a half into my time here at the Goddard Church, and I'm passionate about discipleship. I think it's so important for growth, not just for individuals, but for the church. Jesus commands us to go make disciples, and so um, I have background in discipleship, and really the next big step I saw for us as a church was the need to dive deep into that. And so it just kind of happened to fall at the right time. And so I sat down with the board here at the church and said, "Hey, I think this is the next right thing for you all as a church to dive into." And so it just all kind of fell into place.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So, can you tell us a little bit about both of your early experience with the discipleship assessment in particular? So, many in our audience are probably considering doing the assessment for themselves and for their congregations. So, we'd like to hear a little bit about why you decided to do the assessment. What did you think having your congregation through it would be beneficial to your church? Jordan, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched a little bit on this in the last, but for us, like, um, discipleship can kind of be this like I've been in disciple at my previous church discussions of what is discipleship, and everybody has a million different definitions, and like it can be really confusing for people. Or how do people grow? Well, they don't know how to grow individually or as a church if they don't even know where they're at currently. And so an assessment can really help identify those pieces, and really also expose weaknesses that perhaps the people wouldn't have seen on their own. Or even as a pastor, I could see weaknesses, but coming from inside, it's hard for them to see or to be like, "Oh no, you're just seeing that wrong." Whereas an actual assessment, people are like, "Oh, maybe there is something more to this." And so I've just seen the power that an assessment can provide in really helping move people forward.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
Similarly, and immediately after people took the assessment, just that heightened awareness of where they are and a language as to a process for discipleship, something that is more than assimilation or program ministry. I think that breathed life into people and into the church as well. I had done some reading up on the Reveal survey and the work done in Chicago, and so was interested to know of ascending leaders and learn that they proctored that survey and would help us to wade into those waters and see what the benefit might be and how things might help us in our own discipleship philosophy and practical nature implementation.
Awesome. Thank you.
So sometimes with assessments or surveys like this, people are nervous how many people they're going to be able to get to take it. And you both did really well. Marc, you had 418 people at Marvin Church take it. That's 42% of your congregation. For a large church, that's a really strong percentage and good. And then Jordan, you had 68% of your congregation at Goddard took it, which is exceptionally strong. Tell us, what did you do to, what do you think gave you such strong participation? What kind of things did you do to prepare and to encourage people to take it? Marc, why don't you go first?
We promoted this the retreat weekend with you, and so we had about 70 people come. I would say that was true for both locations that I served where we implemented this, but that really gave us a good base and framework for people who had a common language and were able to speak to this opportunity that rolled out immediately after that retreat. And so we promoted that this was happening, that this was coming. We emailed links to the survey. We texted not millions of people, but lots of people, just keeping the word out in front of people and pestering almost, if you will, in a positive sense, that this is critical. It's vital to help us know who we are and where we want to go. and we had some hunches about where we wanted to go. And so that just aided our urgency in communicating the opportunity.
Well, your people certainly listen to you. How about you, Jordan?
Yeah, for us, I mean, similar. We did all the normal, from announcements from the pulpit to email to all of that. But really, what I would say, and talking about not just, hey, go do this, but here's why. Giving the reason why, but also really our results is part of our church and the culture is we have a significant number of people in small groups compared to our average attendance on Sunday morning. And so we really leveraged that. I made contacts with every small group leader regularly and said, hey, I need you to hold your people in your small group accountable to taking it. And I need you to follow up and make sure and directly ask every person if they've taken it. And if not, keep asking. And so, like, really leveraging those relationships that people have with one another, because just an announcement from the pulpit can go in one ear out the other. We all know that, right? Like,
Yep.
or even an email can get lost. But like when you've got somebody directly asking you, hey, did you remember to do this? It just helps remind people. And so that was a huge thing.
Well, it sounds like you what you did really worked because 68% of your congregation. That's a great number.
Absolutely.
So then you got the results, and were there any surprises in the results that you received? Marc, you got anything?
I think our community here in Tyler is very networked with one another, and Bible studies amongst churches, outside of church, and a lot of service that happens outside of the church and on people's own initiative. And so there were some low marks on those regards related to inside the church. And it's not because people weren't studying their Bible or serving. They were just doing it kind of on their own or outside of the church. We also got some, I think, true looks at how we do as a congregation to provide opportunities for community and accountability. And that happens and maybe has been more organic in nature, or maybe has been long time, but harder for newer members, newer disciples to break into. And so one thing we wanted to do was address that, and that data supported the hunch we had to address providing outlets for transformational community.
Good. And Jordan, how about things at Goddard? What surprised you, or anything you thought was especially important in the results that you received?
This question is kind of opposite for me, because what surprised me is, while I'm passionate about discipleship, I think leading up, just from some of the coaches, like, hey, almost every survey is going to turn out worse than where you think it's going to be, like, just there was a lot of talk around that, the surprise, and our survey ended up actually turning out better than we thought. We ended up landing at 98 on the Spiritual Vitality Index, and as a vibrant church. And we had placed ourselves somewhat there, but like, I was like, okay, we think we're here, but everything I'm hearing is it's probably going to be worse than there. And then all of a sudden, and once that came, I'm like, it makes sense. A lot of our people here are just very deep in their walk with Christ and have deep discipleship. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not room for growth by any means, and we've been working on that. But for us, the surprising factor was just where we landed overall on the with the survey and with the assessment.
Yeah. And you raise a good point there. Often people think vibrant churches are large churches, and there you are, a smaller church, and you were, what'd you say, at 98 with your Spiritual Vitality Index? So it's really quite something. So
I don't recall what our Spiritual Vitality Index was, but another surprise, we did have 50% of our respondents in stage 2, which I think is common, but maybe larger than average. We were pleased with our spiritual vitality index. There is room for growth, and we're addressing some of the things, but we weren't 98%. That's incredible.
Anything else, Jordan, that you thought was important?
I think that the biggest thing was just assessing, even with the SVI at 98, like, okay, how many people are in stage 1 versus stage 2 versus stage 3 and 4, and really beginning to assess that process of how do we move people forward and provide what they need, and assessing, and so yeah, like, I think it's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Well, Marc and Jordan, you both received coaching through Ascending Leaders in a slightly different format. Jordan, you were in a collab. Marc, you did a custom contract with us, but both of you went through the discipleship assessment. So in thinking about your individual experiences and the collab and the individual church, can you talk about a little how your discipleship coach helped you make use of your results? And I know, Jordan, that your vibrant church, you must have thought, gosh, we weren't expecting this such a strong result here. What really work is there to be done? So maybe what are some of the things that your coach helped point out to you, or areas for growth that you may not have seen any otherwise, if anything? And Marc, what were some things that your coach helped you point out and helped you work through that you may not have seen otherwise?
Sure.
Marc.
Yeah, I think for us, with such a large percentage of respondents in stage 2, one thing that was new for us, our coach helped us understand how traditional churches have been positioned to produce those results with our programming, and that more programming doesn't get people moving, it just makes people's lives busier. And to learn of the wall and the reason that people stall in their own discipleship journey was eye-opening. So we've tried to address that. We've also tried to address and have implemented, again, transformational community, whether class meeting or small group discipleship, and discipleship bands or micro group discipleship, just so that people are in community where life is the curriculum and able to hold one another accountable, confess sin, discern where Christ is working in their lives, and just that whole understanding that some people need greater direction, some people need greater discernment, and every stage is vital to this whole journey. Not one is better than the other. That was good learning for us that our coach helped us to grasp.
Yeah, absolutely. Discipleship is a journey of transformation, right? So every stage is important.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, what about something from your experience that your coach helped you achieve?
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest thing was just really working on, okay, so your results, your vibrant church, your SVI is 98. So where do we go from here? Kind of the idea, and the idea of just, okay, great results. That doesn't mean you're going to stay there. It takes work to maintain vibrancy. And so asking that question, what does that look like? What does it look like to continue to keep that vibrant nature? How can you kind of implement this across the church, and what do we need to set up to do that? And we're in the process of some of that with moving into the second year of the collab that we're in. Is, okay, how do we set up kind of the discipleship stages? What are key components that we see as a body, as a local church body, to move people from stage 1 to stage 2, and define our process to help people move forward, break through the wall? Like Marc mentioned the wall, like that's been huge for people. Like like realizing, oh, maybe I've been stuck at a wall overall, or maybe in certain areas within my discipleship, even to break it down smaller, like, I'm growing here, but I'm stuck back here on this item because of this. And how do we help people move forward in some of that? And Mark mentioned discipleship bands. That's one thing that we had already kind of started working on here at the Goddard Church before the assessment, but we've seen that expand with, okay, if people are vibrant, how do we get them in community in a way that continues to press them to grow and to confess sin and to have those confessional relationships that just also keep us humbled, right? Just because we're a vibrant church doesn't mean we're perfect. And, one of the biggest struggles of sin is pride. And so we haven't arrived. And so that
Yes.
idea of like, we haven't arrived. Just because we're vibrant doesn't mean we've arrived, and we always have work to do. We always have space to humble ourselves and really seek the face of God and God's heart for our lives. And so really diving into a lot of that.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan. Mark, I heard you talk a lot about the stages of a disciple's journey, the stages of faith, and that's one thing that discipleship assessment sort of reveals, is talking about what percentage of your congregation is at each stage. For those who might be tuning in today who are not familiar with the stages are, could you give us a brief rundown of what the 4 stages are that the discipleship assessment looks like and what people are like at each stage? And if you recall.
Yeah, let me do my best.
Okay.
So the 4 stages are exploring Christ, growing in Christ, close to Christ, and Christ-centered. And while those stages aren't necessarily biblical, meaning Jesus didn't say, well, there are 4 stages, they certainly do mirror his relationship with the disciples, meeting them where they were all along the way. And so exploring Christ, Jesus, early on in John's gospel, he is approached by Andrew and Peter and James and John. Who is this? Could this be the Messiah? Well, come and see. And so someone in that stage is really exploring faith, exploring Christ, exploring church, trying to make sense out of it all. I've heard Mike say many times over, they're kicking the tires, just checking the vehicle out. And then growing in Christ is when they decide to start following Jesus. The disciples do. They drop their nets and they follow Jesus, and taking another step and going a little bit further in their exploration, or even taking that to the next level because they're responding to what they're gleaning and learning and experiencing. Close to Christ, I love in Marc where Jesus called to him those he wanted to be with him, and he empowered them, equipped them to proclaim the gospel and to cast out demons, perform miracles. And so in that chapter of Mark's gospel, the disciples are named. And so moving into a follow me, or maybe I'm mixing those up, but that's certainly what happens, where Jesus is calling them and there's more skin in the game. They're more intentional in their followership and in their faith. And then the goal is the Christ-centered living. That's stage 4. And the scriptural reference is John 15, Jesus in the upper room with his disciples, really pouring his life, his heart and soul into them, casting the vision and setting the mantle on them for a Christ-centered life and the ministry that is the church. So 30,000 foot, yeah.
That was an excellent overview. Thank you so much. So we've already covered a lot of ground, but I'm curious to see what each of you would say was your biggest takeaway from your experience overall. We talked about sort of an understanding of growth within the stages. We've talked about helping your ascending leaders coach, helping you understand humility through the process, Jordan, and not really getting comfortable where you are, knowing that sanctification transformation is a continual process. What were some of your other big takeaways from your experience? And Jordan, I know you are going through the collab, so your experience is going to look a little bit different than Marc's. But if you would talk a little bit about what you've gleaned from the collab as well, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about that as well.
I would say, yeah, two things for us. I mean, you mentioned the collab. Something that's been huge is to walk through this with a team from the church, and really walk through. So it's not just, okay, here are the survey results, pastor. You meet with a coach and go. It's, hey, bring a team and gathering together off-site with a team to learn together and grow together. From our coaches and Mike and others was huge, because to have that kind of, especially having the right people on the team to really then integrate it across the church has been a huge thing, and that's been really beneficial. But the second thing I would say is, so while we scored high in every area, there was one area that was still pretty decent compared to others in the area, but it was also our lowest area of scoring. Was in our assessment, there was an area that looked at kind of the fruit of the Spirit in people's lives, and specifically it dove into love, and under the love, it talked about like the sense that God's grace enables us to forgive other people. And so what we discovered was, man, we've got some work to do in the area of forgiveness at our church. Like that there's a lot of unforgiveness and perhaps resentment or bitterness or things built up within people's hearts. And so we began to ask questions around that. And I specifically just, our team asked questions. I would ask individual questions about it. And how do we dive down into this and really, really look at this? If this is one of our hardest areas. And so out of that, we actually made the decision. We invested in, we did a 40-day forgiving challenge. There was a 40-day book, and we did small groups and sermon series. And the book was a daily devotional for just personal growth to talk about forgiveness. And so we did this. We launched this big forgiving challenge church-wide. And we just, as a church, our board decided, hey, let's invest in this. So we bought books for everybody, because sometimes people, if they've got to buy the book, won't take it. So we bought enough books for our kids, our youth, our adults across the board, and just said, take them. We want you to engage in this. And let me just say, the 40-day challenge didn't deal with forgiving others. It dealt with understanding the forgiveness we have in Jesus for ourselves more fully. And that was such a powerful thing for people. I mean, the testimony and members coming, just some in tears, like, I've struggled, like, yeah, I struggle with forgiving others, but more than that, I struggle to forgive myself for the past things that I've done. Like, and really what I loved about the forgiving challenge was this idea of, like, before we can fully forgive others, we've got to grasp and understand the forgiveness that we have in Jesus and accept that. And I feel like there was a lot of shame and even just lies from the enemy to people's hearts that, like, oh, yeah, you're forgiven in Jesus, but not fully, like, and so that was a huge breakthrough for many in our congregation. And then we followed that 40-day challenge up with, I did a sermon series on forgiveness according to Joseph, and forgiving others, and walking through, okay, now we've gone through 40 days of understanding Jesus' forgiveness of us. So now how do we move into extending and offering forgiveness to those who have wronged us, and walking that hard road? So we spent quite a bit of time on the theme of forgiveness, and it was powerful because we saw, I saw chains break, like, and people who were holding on to bitterness just, like, release that. and the freedom that came with that, and people just sharing with me about that and the ways that they were released um, from those things. And so, yeah, that probably so far we're a year in, but that's probably our biggest takeaway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's powerful. I'm glad that you were able to uncover that through going through the Renova survey or the Reveal assessment and getting some coaching and brought that to your congregation. It sounds like it was very impactful. Marc, what is your biggest takeaway overall from your experience coming to Ascending Leaders and doing the discipleship assessment as an individual church?
Sure. One of my biggest takeaways from Ascending Leaders is emotionally healthy discipleship, that whole franchise, Pisca Zero. And so grateful to learn of that and implement that here at Marvin. It's been successful for those who've taken it. I feel like now learning of the 40-day forgiveness challenge, Jordan, I want the name of the book and to hear about how you all did that. The best thing, you triggered a thought, Jordan, that I've forgotten. I mentioned 70 people at our retreat and how that just gave us a common language for the rest of the congregation as we're rolling out Reveal. We did a similar thing. I can't say enough about team. Prior to that retreat, my discipleship team, we met 4 weeks in a row the month of January, and we watched Mike, you on YouTube. And so grateful that all of your resources and materials are out there. We watched all of those videos, and the team had a common language. And so just this trickled out of starting small, bigger, and then church wide. I think sometimes I feel like I'm sick of talking about discipleship pathway and that the church is tired of hearing about it. But that was our action item from the Reveal survey, not to get more people taking emotionally healthy spirituality, and not to get more people into class meetings and band meetings, and not to get more people in worship or make more members, but make disciples. And so the pathway we've used the language that every stage is important, help through the coaching. We've identified what are the things that are best at getting people moving. Doesn't mean they are the things we do that have the most people attend, but challenged us to think about transformation and not just physical numbers. And that helped us identify the things that in fact do help get people moving. And I think I've alluded to this already, but there were many people who took the survey and get immediate results and were surprised, thought they would be further along than they were. And I think that they were at some point, or we all are. It's not linear, but sometimes looks like spaghetti on the wall. What Reveal, what coaching, what the implementation of Discipleship Pathway has done and is doing, I think it's awaking a sleeping giant here at Marvin, which is a great church, great mission heart, long history of biblical teaching and commitment to discipleship, great reputation in the community. And now, because of a number of things, but this certainly is one of those things, there's just a great spirit in the church, and people are passionate about transformational relationship and ministry and experience and movement. And so all of that has been the result of our coaching and the assessment, and even my own learning and my own journey. So
Yeah,
grateful. Great.
Marc, you had how many people was it that you've had again who've taken a step forward in getting into a band or a class or emotionally healthy spirituality group?
We have about 18 to 20 discipleship bands and total 80 people. We've got over 100 people in a class meeting, and that's about 10 groups. We've got a plan for regular rollout and onboarding of new people who want to be in a class or a band, regular gatherings, so that we are able to look in a mirror and remind ourselves what exactly is a class meeting, what exactly is a discipleship band, and why do we do these things. And we have just completed today the second round of the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship series. So twice now we've done Emotionally Healthy Spirituality in the fall, and today concludes the second spring of Emotionally Healthy Relationships. And probably all told, 40 people have experienced that. And as they experience, they're recommending it for others and stepping up as table leaders. We've passed the baton of who teaches that class. And so that's, matriculating leaders in its own way.
Yeah.
Great.
Great. Marc and Jordan, you both mentioned the importance of building your discipleship team throughout the process. And you talked about some of your high points and getting people moving and building some common language around discipleship through the retreat. But could you talk a little bit about what you did to form your team and how your team was instrumental in moving the process forward and achieving the discipleship growth that you desired through the process?
When I was appointed here, there was a team in place, and that has evolved even after that first 6 months with nominations and at the start of a new year. And so once we started strategic planning and leaning into discipleship, that became the committee that helped work that pillar, if you will, of our strategic plan, the discipleship pillar. So integrated that into our team, and just early and often going back to 2021, watching these videos, hosting the retreat, and then working with them to just study the results, know the results, understand them, disseminate information, educate the congregation on our results, meetings after meetings where the whole team was involved in church-wide communication of this is where we landed and what it all means. And now it's 2 years later, and we're doing some evaluative work on how things are going. But I think we're also kind of still living into the pathway and maybe are almost a little bit bored. Hate to say that, but what's next? That's kind of where we are in as far as our team goes. Still vital, meeting faithfully and committed to this work, but just wondering what do we do? What?
Yeah. Well, that probably feels great to feel like you're closing a chapter and opening up a new one for even greater growth. So
yes.
That's fantastic.
And our commitment is for assessment in 2024. So figuring out what's that going to be, how's that going to look, and what will our results look like on the other side of it after 3 years.
Mm-hmm. We'll be excited to see.
Yeah.
Jordan, how about your discipleship team? How have they been helping you work through some things with your results, getting the whole congregation on board, really becoming your guiding coalition through the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is I put together a team specifically for this process. One of the first things that I did coming here to the Goddard Church is we moved from the traditional multiple board model to one board model to kind of do administrative work, right? But I said, okay, so how do we now put together the ministry teams necessary to gather? And so this was one of the first ones put together, and I knew I would need a key people on that group, including key lay leaders and in the different areas of the church and different experiences. And so Marcia, one of the chair of this group, has been instrumental, a co-chair, along with Susan, to two of the women in our group. And one's been here at the church for quite a while, and the other came at the same time that I did. And so also having different perspectives of different places has been important. But really, I wanted people that I knew and felt were committed to discipleship and committed to growth personally to be on that team. And so that's kind of what I was looking for, but also that we're integrated in the church in different areas as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes with pastor church put together teams, they struggle with who's going to be the team lead and finding one person to take the responsibility. But you did that well with having co-leaders, so it's not all on one person's shoulders, right? So good, good. Hey, I want to thank you both Mark and Jordan, for the information you've given us for pastors who may be interested in doing a discipleship assessment of their church. Also for your vulnerability. I know you're making public some information that's not necessarily meant to be public, about your own church. You're telling about your weaknesses and your gaps as well as your strengths. So we really appreciate you and you taking the time for that. But before we open the floor to questions, and we're going to do that in a few minutes in the chat feature, people can put questions and we'll discuss those. But just what would you say to pastors and church leaders who are considering doing an assessment for discipleship, or considering coaching with ascending leaders? What advice would you give them?
I would suggest checking out the videos online, familiarizing yourself with the content, and consider what could conversation around these concepts in the context of the whole church community look like. What benefit could it be to the mission of making disciples?
Yeah, and that's on the YouTube channel. We have an Ascending Leaders channel on YouTube. I just want to add to that, Mark. Mark's church is a case study, and there's videos of Mark talking about that on Ascending Leaders website, so somebody can look at that as well. Jordan, how about you?
Oh, I would say commit to it and do it. Um, I think the biggest thing in staring at it for me was like, whoo, do I have the time for this?
Mm-hmm.
It's a time commitment.
Yeah.
It's not, like it takes work. And yet discipleship should be number one. It's so important. And sometimes I think the temptation is to kind of put it on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
It'll kind of take care of itself, or it's not going to take care of itself, in the sense of like and so it's hard to measure. It's a lot of work. And yet it's so, so important. And so I would say do it, because the awesome thing about ascending leaders and this process is they hold you accountable to helping you make sure that you're doing it. If you don't have a greater, if we I think in our brokenness we tend to get comfortable and we just kind of settle. So to have those next steps pushing you forward in the midst of the busyness of ministry, because we all know ministry can be busy, it can really help us make sure we're leading our church as well.
Yeah, Jordan, know that your coach says, they're always right on top of things. They get things done right away. That's his compliment toward you.
Well, we'd like to open up the floor to any questions. If you're tuning in today and have a question for Pastor Marc or Pastor Jordan about their experiences, or just have a question about anything that you've heard in general today, please go ahead and use that chat feature right there in Riverside. You can type that in. We'll wait for a couple minutes until anything comes through. But it has been fantastic hearing about the discipleship assessment, your experience with that, and what your church has been learning and growing through that assessment results and through that process. So any questions, please type them in the chat. So we have one question. What denominations do we typically work with? I believe they're referring to ascending leaders. So we work with all denominations, any Protestant denominations we work with. We've worked a lot just with the Methodist churches, both the UMC and the newly formed GMC. We've worked with Christian Reformed churches, Presbyterian churches of all branches. We've done some work with the Baptists. We've done some work at the Pentecostal Charismatic bent. Evangelical non-denominational churches, and we've worked north, south, east, and west, and we've even done some discipleship training abroad. So all denominations are welcome here in Ascending Leaders, and we'd love to serve you. We have another question that's come in. What's been the biggest challenge point you've encountered in your church culture as you've been going through the process? what's been the biggest challenge point you've encountered in your church culture as you've been going through the process?
Go ahead, Jordan.
Thanks, Marc.
That's great of you, Marc.
Man, I would say, that's a hard one for me to answer, and part of that, as you talk about church culture, walking into the Goddard Church here, I encountered two things. One, when I started here in the middle of 2020, they hadn't been worshiping, obviously, in the midst of it. So everything got reset. Also, this church, while we're smaller, used to be bigger, used to worship 300 people, and has gone through a series of really hard things. And just to be honest, some had said we lost hope that we would keep our doors open for much longer. And God has moved in powerful ways, and we're seeing growth spiritually and in other ways as well. And the hope of Jesus has been restored in so many ways. But because of that, so much had been stripped away that much of this is how we've always done it culture. It's been a blessing. I haven't had the uphill battle that some might have against a set culture. Primarily, I would say because of the context here, but also because of when we started it, right after COVID, when everything was stripped away. And so it's been a blessing. That doesn't mean we haven't had challenges, really convincing people to do the forgiving challenge and those pieces. But we haven't encountered major things, and that's been a blessing.
Marc, what about you? Do you have anything to add about church culture? Maybe some pushback you've received in going through the process at all? If not, that's okay too.
I have not had any pushback. It's interesting. I had a similar move. Jordan came mid 2020. And so to move during COVID, that was a challenge, but maybe a blessing, because we did strategic planning. People responded to the survey because what else are they going to do? They had time, And so the challenge was continuously getting the word out there. And I've really been grateful for how responsive and willing that I got to say, most people have been to participate, to listen to it again and again and again, and to embrace the pathway and the idea of 4 stages. And even if they don't get the idea of 4 stages, the journey and transformation, things like that. So, yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you haven't received any pushback and that your congregation was excited for the changes to come. We did have one question that came in, Marc, I think, and Jordan, I think you could answer this as well, but Marc, you talked more about it. They're just asking, what is meant by a band? So for those who may not be from a Wesleyan background, can you explain what a band is, please?
Discipleship Band is a micro group of 3 same-gendered individuals who meet weekly for the purpose of sanctification. So celebrating successes, acknowledging struggles, sharing how the Spirit and Scripture are speaking to you. And then the biggie is confessing sin. The last question of the agenda is, are you telling any secrets? Are you keeping any secrets? And so really being willing to peel back layers, to expose your heart, to be vulnerable. And that is intimidating and daunting. And as new groups begin, the encouragement is, well, just answer the first 2 questions. How's it with your soul? What are your struggles and successes? And over time, ask some of the deeper questions. But without fail, if one person is willing to go there, the rest of the micro group will go there too. And so the beauty of 3 people, it's easy to find a time in the week when 3 of us can meet. Then 12 or 15 and somebody's not there, or half of us are missing or what have you. And it keeps the agenda to an hour. So we're in and out. And I met with my band this morning. We meet at 6 o'clock and hardly affects home, work, anything like that. And so, yeah, it's transformational.
Yep. So a band is a very small group of individuals for fellowship accountability.
No curriculum other than life.
Thank you so much, Marc. And Marc, we have one more question. It was asked specifically to you. And this person would like to know what the relationship between the survey, the assessment, and the decision to start the classes bands, as well as the emotionally healthy spirituality resources. What was the relationship between the assessment and those things?
There were some questions on the survey that identified or suggested or communicated we could do a better job at helping people find community that affords accountability. I think, so just point blank, that some people have a hard time finding that, breaking in, experiencing transformation. So we were intentional to respond and integrate classes and bands. I think for the wall, the biggest thing may have been the data that had 50% of our respondents in stage 2 scratching their heads, but I'm doing the things, and it may not be the right things, and may be stuck just doing what we've always done and not knowing any better, any differently. And so having learned of emotionally healthy spirituality, maybe some deeper, ancient spiritual disciplines and practices that might get below the surface or afford us doing things differently to experience a deeper relationship with God, and just the whole theory or impetus that our emotional health is tied to our spiritual health. And so analyzing family of origin and understanding maybe we don't dig deep into trauma, but just some experiences we may have had that are holding us back. And even how am I at relating, conversating, and being in real relationship with everybody, from wife, children, parents, to coworkers and peers in the church. Emotional health is vital.
Can I add to that, to build on what Marc said? You said you had 50% of your congregation was at the growing in Christ stage.
Yes.
And your average congregation, that is going to be your largest group of the 4 stages, that growing in Christ stage. And so anything, even if you don't take an assessment, anything a church could do to get people to move beyond that dependence on the church, going deeper, the emotionally healthy stuff you did, bands you did. I mean, that's a winner for any church, even if they haven't taken an assessment, because they probably have their largest number of people in that second stage. And it's a less spiritually mature stage.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We have one final question. I think, Mike, you're going to need to answer this. Somebody is asking about our Lunch and Learn. We have a Lunch and Learn coming up on May 10th. It's going to be hosted by Chapelwood United Methodist Church in the Memorial area of Houston, Texas. That's open to all denominations and to anybody in the church who is pastoring, serving, leading. Please invite everybody that would be interested in hearing about it to come and enjoy a free meal and to hear more about ascending leaders. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what the difference will be from what people have heard today with the webinar and what they might be hearing at the Lunch and Learn coming up?
Yeah, unfortunately, we will not have Marc or Jordan there, so you won't be able to hear them there. And this was really about doing an assessment. And that is going to cover some other areas like building a discipleship culture, why discipleship is important, and creating a discipleship pathway. That's actually some of the stuff Jordan will soon be doing in the collab. We're going to give you a sneak peek at some of that at the Lunch and Learn. So that's what Lunch and Learn is going to be like.
That's right. We'll also be talking a little bit about what the logistics of a partnership with us will look like, similar to what Marc went through in the custom package for his individual church. So I'll be talking about that, and Mike will be talking about building discipleship culture in your church. And please feel free to come and invite all your friends. So this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, everybody, who tuned in. A special thank you to Pastor Marc and Pastor Jordan, our guests, for their time today and for the great information they shared. We hope that this webinar was helpful for you. If you'd like to find out more about Ascending Leaders, you can visit us on our website at ascendingleaders.org or email us at info@ascendingleaders.org. And again, feel free to email us at info to get registered for that Lunch and Learn event. And it's free, open to all denominations, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Marc and Jordan.